I never thought I'd be the kind of person to sit in a parking lot staring at my own hands, trying to convince myself I wasn't losing my mind. But there I was, clutching the steering wheel of my Honda CR-V in front of the Starbucks on Main Street in downtown Raleigh, watching the car I'd once helped him buy, a used BMW that he swore was a smart investment, park in front of a small, dimly lit apartment building 2 blocks away. I didn't know her name. I didn't know how long it had been going on. All I knew was the number of charges on our joint account, the receipts, and the text messages I had stumbled upon by accident. My husband, my partner in everything, was spending thousands of our money on her, and not a little, big, deliberate amounts, the kind of money we could have used to finally fix the roof or put a decent down payment on a vacation we'd promised ourselves for years. It's strange the way your mind reacts when the truth hits. My first reaction was disbelief. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was business-related. Maybe it was a gift for a friend. But then I looked at the transactions again. The late-night charges to a boutique I'd never heard of. The Airbnb rentals in cities neither of us had any reason to visit. The last straw was the name on the credit card receipt. Her initials. I knew them because, well, he had let slip a few times. Nothing I thought mattered at the time. I've always trusted him to handle our finances. I told him we were a team, that I wasn't interested in micromanaging. And now that trust felt like a joke, a cruel joke I couldn't stop hearing over and over in my head. I had always thought my marriage was built on honesty, or at least a mutual respect for each other's boundaries. We weren't rich, but we were stable. I worked as a marketing coordinator at a small firm downtown. He was in sales, always charming clients and making deals. We had our disagreements, sure, like any couple, but nothing that felt like a warning sign. Not that I saw. And now, in the span of 2 weeks of noticing things that didn't add up, I realized I had been living next to a stranger masquerading as my husband. I remember sitting at the kitchen table that Saturday morning, the sunlight cutting across the tile floor, trying to breathe as I looked at the spreadsheet I had put together. Every single unexplained withdrawal, every secret charge, every late-night text. It painted a picture I wasn't ready to accept, but there it was, glaring at me like neon lights in the dark. He was spending our money, our future, on another woman. The thing about discovering this isn't just the betrayal, it's the erosion of your own sense of reality. For the first time, I started to question everything, every hug, every smile, every time he said he was out late for work. I could replay all those moments now and pick them apart. The gas station run at 11 p.m. last month that I thought was him grabbing snacks for the game could have been him meeting her. The team meeting he went to in Charlotte for 2 days, maybe not a meeting at all. And suddenly every small detail I had ever dismissed as nothing became a potential lie, a breadcrumb trail leading to a truth I wasn't sure I was strong enough to face. I knew I needed more than just a spreadsheet. I needed proof. Not proof to confront him yet. God, I wasn't ready for that. But proof to convince myself that I wasn't losing my mind. So I started watching him in small ways. I know it sounds obsessive. I would never have imagined myself doing something like that, but it felt like survival. I learned his patterns. I learned when he left for work, when he supposedly went to lunch, and when he came home. And then one Thursday evening, it all clicked. He had texted me at 5:47 p.m. saying he'd be late because of a client dinner. But I had been tracking the GPS on his phone, which he had carelessly left in the car one night while charging. He wasn't at a restaurant. He was at her place, just sitting there, laughing at something on her couch. And that's when it hit me. Not the cheating itself, but the recklessness, the casualness of it. He wasn't sneaky, he was careless because he assumed I would never notice, that I would never check, that I would never suspect him. I remember driving past the building that night, trying to memorize the number on the mailbox, the faded paint on the door, the way the streetlight flickered. My stomach was a mess, my chest tight, my mind racing. I couldn't stop thinking about all the times I had asked him about expenses, all the times I had suggested saving for the house or the new car or our vacations. All those responsible conversations seemed like nothing in hindsight. I had trusted him with everything, our money, our home, our plans for the future, and he had spent it on her, on another woman who probably had no idea that the money she was enjoying had come from the life I was living, thinking he was mine, committed to me, sharing his days, his nights, his life. That betrayal, that magnitude of it, made my blood run cold. I had never felt so simultaneously furious and powerless in my life. And yet, even with all the anger, there was confusion. Because this was the man I had loved, the man I had married. We had shared jokes, meals, a dog named Baxter, a tiny apartment before we moved into our current place.
had imagined growing old with him, celebrating anniversaries, laughing at the stupid arguments about which Netflix show to binge next. I had trusted him with my world, and now in the harsh, bright light of reality, that world felt shattered. I wanted to confront him, to scream, to demand an explanation, but part of me still couldn't reconcile the two versions of him. The husband I knew, the man I married, and the one who had secretly been spending our money on another woman. I couldn't reconcile those worlds. It was like living two separate lives in one house, and I was the only one awake. For days I oscillated between watching him and trying to pretend nothing was wrong. I kept it together at work, smiled at colleagues, laughed at stupid memes in the break room, all while my chest felt like it was packed with stones. I barely ate, barely slept, and when I did, I dreamt of confrontations that never happened. Every time he kissed me on the cheek or asked about my day, I felt my stomach twist. Did he feel guilty? Was he aware that I had found out? Or was he, as usual, completely oblivious to the destruction he had caused? I couldn't answer that, and maybe that uncertainty was worse than the betrayal itself. At least if he had been upfront, if he had admitted it, I could have processed it. But he hadn't. He had done this quietly, carefully, in the shadows, while I continued to plan our lives together, ignorant, trusting, loving, and that was a kind of cruelty that was unbearable. I started to notice the little things I had never noticed before. His phone always face down, his wallet always hidden, the way he clears browser history obsessively. Every time he laughed at a joke I didn't understand, every time he said, "I'll handle it," about money matters, I felt a pang of suspicion. And with each suspicion, my anger grew, not just at him, but at myself for missing the signs, for giving him blind trust, for believing in a partnership that existed only in my imagination. I began to understand how people spiral in situations like this.
How you oscillate between love and hatred, confusion and clarity, obsession and detachment. I had become someone I didn't recognize, someone living half a life, staring out car windows and scrolling through transactions like they were evidence in a trial I wasn't sure I was ready to hold. Then came the day I decided to confront the bank. I needed records, statements, everything showing the withdrawals, the charges, the patterns. I had a plan. Get the evidence in hand, then confront him. But the closer I got to acting, the more my hands shook. I was terrified of the fallout, of the conversation, of what I might find next. The idea that there could be even more charges I hadn't noticed yet, that he could have done worse, left me feeling trapped in my own house, a hostage to the knowledge of his betrayal. I spent hours at the bank, explaining to the teller that I needed statements, that I was checking our accounts. I felt ridiculous, like a paranoid spouse, but at that point I didn't care. I had crossed the threshold. There was no going back. By the time I returned home, I had stacks of statements, printouts, spreadsheets, and screenshots. I sat at the kitchen table again, the dog lying at my feet, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. I went through the numbers, one by one, and the scale of it hit me fully for the first time. Thousands upon thousands of dollars, gone. Trips I had no knowledge of, dinners I hadn't attended, gifts I hadn't received. And the worst part? It all looked normal on paper. Just numbers, just transactions. Nothing screamed betrayal unless you knew what you were looking for. And now I did. I knew, and I had the receipts. I had proof. And yet holding that proof in my hands didn't bring relief. It brought a new kind of terror. Because the next step, the confrontation, the conversation that would change everything, it loomed ahead of me like a dark cloud, and I didn't know if I had the courage to walk into it. I remember sitting there, staring at the receipts, trying to imagine how I would say it out loud. How could you even start a conversation like that? "Hey, remember all the times I trusted you with our money? Yeah, you spent it on another woman." It sounded absurd, almost cinematic in its implausibility. And maybe it was the absurdity that made it hurt even more. I was living a nightmare, a story I never thought I'd be a character in. I had imagined heartbreak in movies, in books, in the lives of other people. Never mine. Never in this quiet little suburban home in Raleigh, with the dog and the mortgage and the perfectly normal Saturday mornings we used to have. And now here I was, alone with the truth, wondering how much of the man I had loved was actually real.
I remember the night it finally happened, the night I couldn't hold it in anymore. He had come home from a late meeting that I already knew was a lie. The smell of his cologne hit me in a way that used to make my stomach flip with excitement, but now it just made my chest tighten with resentment. I had been pacing the living room for an hour, the printouts scattered across the coffee table like pieces of a crime scene. Every time he came near, I felt like my heart was a time bomb ready to explode. I wanted him to see the rage, the hurt, the disbelief that I had been holding back for weeks. I wanted him to know I had the proof and that I knew exactly what he had been doing. But when he walked through the door, the casual smile on his face, I felt a wave of panic. I wasn't ready, not completely. I needed to be in control, and more than that, I needed him to feel the weight of it. I needed him to realize that this wasn't just a mistake, it was a series of choices, repeated day after day, that shattered everything we had built together. He hung his coat on the rack, not looking at me, not noticing the tension. I could hear the keys drop into the bowl by the door. My hands were shaking so badly that I had to grab the edge of the table to steady myself. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. I wanted to scream, to cry, to demand an explanation, but none of that seemed enough. I wanted him to look me in the eyes and feel the fear I had felt, the betrayal, the exhaustion of pretending everything was normal while he was living a secret life. Finally, I forced the words out, shaking but clear. "We need to talk," I said. His eyes flicked to me, wary, curious, maybe even annoyed. "About what?" he asked casually, like this could be some trivial argument about groceries or bills. But I knew better. I had him right where I wanted him, and I could see the first flash of unease cross his face, that flicker of guilt that he thought he had hidden so well. I laid the statements on the table, the receipts, the spreadsheets, every single transaction highlighted. His face shifted from confusion to shock, and finally to that dangerous, self-assured charm I had hated to see in this context. "What is this?" he asked, pretending innocence, but I could see the little twitch in his jaw, the slight narrowing of his eyes. I almost laughed in disbelief. This was the man I had married, who I thought I knew, pretending like he hadn't just spent our savings on someone else for months. I wanted to hit him, to scream, but instead I forced myself to stay calm, each word measured and deliberate. "Don't lie to me. I know about her. I know about the money. I have everything, every last detail." And then I waited for the denial, the excuses, the pleading, anything. What came instead was silence. He stared at the papers, then at me, then back at the papers. Finally, he let out a long, slow breath and said, almost casually, You found out." His tone was strange, like he was impressed that I had uncovered it rather than ashamed that I had. That casualness, the lack of remorse in the voice of the man who had been robbing our life made my blood boil. I wanted to slap him, to shake him, to make him feel the raw chaos he had inflicted on me. But instead, I focused. I needed him to confess everything, to tell me the truth in its entirety, without excuses, without charm, without deflection. I needed him to reveal the depth of the betrayal, because only then could I make any sense of what had been done. He leaned back against the counter, arms crossed, like he was ready to negotiate, like he could charm his way out of this. "It wasn't like that," he started, and I could feel the lies slipping out before the words even finished forming. "I mean, I didn't mean to." I cut him off, voice sharp and cold. "Didn't mean to? You spent thousands of dollars of our money on her? You lied, you snuck around, you made a mockery of everything I thought we had." I could see him flinch, and part of me savored that, even as another part of me ached for the man I thought I knew. "It wasn't just money," I continued, my voice trembling despite myself. "It was everything. The trust, the plans, the life we were building. You destroyed it. And for what? Some fling? Some thrill? Did you even think about me for a second?" His face hardened, finally letting the guilt show in subtle lines around his eyes. He looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw the man behind the charm, the one who had made terrible choices and now had to face them. He tried to explain, but the words sounded hollow even to him. Something about loneliness, something about excitement, something about mistakes he couldn't take back.
I listened, but I didn't speak, because I realized in that moment that words weren't enough. They never would be. I had seen the evidence, the proof of his betrayal, and nothing he said could undo it. The house felt smaller, the air thicker, Baxter, our dog, barked at the tension, sensing something wrong in the atmosphere, pacing between us. I didn't notice him. I was too busy trying to process, to figure out if the man I had spent years loving was someone I could even recognize anymore. Could I forgive him? Could I live with this? Could I even continue pretending to coexist in the same house with someone who had been so deliberately deceptive? That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the quiet of our suburban neighborhood punctuated only by the occasional car passing by. I thought about all the little moments, all the ways I had been blind, and it made my chest ache. I kept imagining scenarios, confrontations, arguments that might come next. Part of me wanted to throw him out immediately, pack my things and never look back. Another part of me felt stuck, trapped by the years we had invested, the life we had built, the routine that had somehow become my cage. I realized that betrayal doesn't just hurt in the moment. It lingers, infects every memory, every conversation, every interaction. I would never look at him the same way again, and I knew that every glance, every touch, every word would be filtered through the lens of what he had done. Over the next few days, our home felt like a war zone. Every conversation was laden with tension, every glance suspicious. I found myself watching him more closely, checking his phone, monitoring his movements, listening for any hint of her. I hated myself for it, hated that I had been dragged into this state of hypervigilance, but I couldn't stop. It was survival. And during that same time, he seemed different, more cautious, quieter, almost embarrassed. It was like he had been stripped of the confidence he wore like armor for so long. But even then, I didn't trust it. I couldn't. Because this wasn't just about guilt. It was about a pattern, about choices, about betrayal that had been deliberate. And deliberate things don't suddenly vanish when caught. One evening, he tried to initiate a conversation, attempting to rebuild some bridge, to apologize, to negotiate forgiveness. I listened, expression carefully neutral, pretending to consider his words. I could feel the emotions welling up inside me, anger, sorrow, disbelief, a strange piercing sadness. He said things like, "I messed up. I want to make it right. I love you. I swear I never meant to hurt you." I wanted to scream, to throw something, to make him feel a fraction of the agony he had caused me. But instead, I asked one question that he couldn't charm or excuse. Why? Why her? Why not me? He faltered, as though he hadn't prepared for that one. And when he finally spoke, it wasn't about me. It wasn't about the marriage, the promises, the shared life. It was about desire, about excitement, about what he had been craving that he claimed I couldn't provide. And in that moment, I realized the betrayal wasn't just financial. It was emotional, spiritual, a full invasion of the trust and love I had given freely. And that, I think, hurt worse than the money ever could. In the following weeks, our dynamic shifted into something I can only describe as a tense truce. He became more careful, more apologetic, more measured, while I hovered on the edge of suspicion and rage. I stayed awake for hours at night, scrolling through messages, piecing together the extent of his contact with her. Each discovery, each hidden detail felt like salt in a wound that refused to heal. I began questioning everything about our life together, every shared moment, every promise, every plan for the future. Could I ever trust him again? Could I ever trust anyone again? The questions circled in my mind endlessly, gnawing in my sense of reality, my identity, my sanity. At the same time, I was forced to reckon with my own complicity. I had given him control over our finances. I had trusted him implicitly. I had ignored subtle hints, brushed off suspicions, told myself I was overreacting when small anomalies cropped up. And now, that trust had been weaponized against me, transformed into a betrayal that left me gasping for air. I had to confront not just his actions, but the fact that I had allowed myself to be vulnerable in ways that had been exploited. And even as I wrestled with that, I couldn't ignore the visceral, all-consuming anger that simmered just below the surface, threatening to boil over at any moment. It was exhausting, both mentally and physically, and yet I felt powerless to stop it.
I remember sitting one night at the kitchen table, staring at the printouts, trying to understand how someone could live a double life so casually. How could someone spend thousands of dollars meant for shared bills, meant for shared dreams, meant for a life built together, on someone else? On a woman he barely knew, a woman whose impact on his life would probably be fleeting, yet whose presence had completely upended mine? I couldn't reconcile it. And that lack of reconciliation, that impossibility of understanding, was one of the cruelest parts of all. I wanted clarity. I wanted answers. I wanted him to crumble under the weight of his choices and to understand finally what he had destroyed. But instead, he seemed almost proud, almost exhilarated, like living dangerously had been worth the risk. And that realization made me wonder if the man I had married had ever been the man I thought I knew at all. The mornings became the hardest part. I would wake up before him, lying in bed and listening to the faint hum of our refrigerator, the quiet tick of the clock on the wall. I would replay everything in my head, the receipts, the transactions, the proof of his betrayal. Sometimes I would imagine confronting him in those early hours, catching him before he could even wake fully, dragging the truth into the daylight when he couldn't hide behind charm or feigned innocence. But instead, I'd lie there, the sheets tangled around me, feeling a mix of rage, exhaustion, and disbelief. I couldn't get out of bed fast enough, yet every step in the quiet apartment felt heavy, as if the walls themselves were pressing down on me, reminding me that I was trapped in this life I had once thought was safe. Even Baxter seemed to sense it, curling up against my side as if trying to protect me from the weight of everything I now knew. I started avoiding him in small ways, deliberately leaving the kitchen before he got there, spending late nights in my office pretending to work, taking long walks around the neighborhood when I could have stayed home and confronted him. I wasn't sure if it was self-preservation or a way to punish him, but it was necessary. I had to create space between us, even as I remained painfully aware that he was still in the house, that every laugh, every casual remark, every question about my day came from a man who had been living a lie for months. Sometimes I would catch him staring at me, that flicker of guilt or worry in his eyes, and it would make me feel simultaneously vindicated and hollow. I wanted to scream at him for daring to act normal, for daring to exist as if nothing had happened, but I couldn't summon the energy.
Instead, I let the tension hang like smoke between us, thick and suffocating, while I tried to piece together the next steps in my own mind. Then came the discovery that made my stomach drop in a way nothing else had. I was going through our emails, trying to track all the digital breadcrumbs, and I found one from her, cleverly disguised but unmistakable once I looked closely. She had sent him a message thanking him for a weekend trip, mentioning all the fun and can't wait to do it again. My hands shook as I read it, the reality sinking in fully that this wasn't some fleeting crush or a one-time mistake. This had been a sustained, ongoing deception, complete with dates, gifts, and trips that I had no part in, no knowledge of, no say in. I stared at the screen, the glow illuminating my tear-streaked face, feeling the weight of everything crash down all at once. I felt small, insignificant, like I had been living in a parallel life where I didn't matter, while he spent hours on someone else. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about money. It was about identity, about trust, about my entire life being a lie. And the depth of that hurt was something I didn't think I could ever articulate to anyone else without breaking. I confronted him again that night, and this time I didn't even try to hide my fury. I flung the email onto the table in front of him. "Look at this," I spat, voice trembling with rage. "Another trip, another lie. You've been living like this for months, and you thought I wouldn't find out." He looked at the email, then at me, and for a second I thought maybe he would finally crumble. But no. Instead, he leaned back, hands in his pockets, and said, "It's complicated." Complicated. That one word almost made me laugh. Complicated? You call betraying the person you vowed to spend your life with, lying, sneaking, spending our money on someone else, complicated? I wanted to hit him, but instead I took a deep breath, forcing myself to speak slowly, carefully, each word like a knife. "No, it's simple. You chose her over me, over us, over everything we built. You made a choice, and it's not complicated. It's betrayal." He didn't respond for a long time. He just stared at me with those same pleading eyes I had once melted for, but now they seemed empty, hollowed out.
The man I loved, the man I trusted, had become a stranger who had spent our life in secret, indulging some selfish desire, while I carried the weight of ignorance. I wanted him to apologize, to cry, to collapse under the realization of the pain he had caused me. But he didn't. He just sat there, quiet, like he was waiting for me to calm down so he could try to explain, try to charm, try to fix what he had broken. And I realized then that some things aren't fixable, not with charm, not with apologies, not with promises. Some betrayals are like scars that go deep, into the bones, into the soul, and they leave you changed forever. I started sleeping in the guest room after that. Every time I walked past him in the morning, trying not to notice the way he dressed, the way he moved, the way he still tried to act normal, I felt a mixture of loathing and longing. I hated him for what he had done, yet part of me ached for the man I thought I knew. I missed the quiet nights we used to spend on the couch, the way he would joke about ridiculous things, the way we would plan our vacations together. But that man, the one I had loved, was buried under months of lies and deceit, and I didn't know if he could ever return. I didn't know if I wanted him to. I was trapped between anger and nostalgia, between betrayal and love, and it was exhausting. Every glance, every word, every breath between us was heavy with the weight of the secrets we could no longer ignore. Then came the legal side of things, the part I hadn't anticipated. I had to talk to our bank, figure out what we could recover, understand what was legally mine, what had been spent. Sitting across from a banker I barely knew, explaining that my husband had been spending our money on another woman, was surreal. I felt exposed, humiliated, but also strangely empowered. I realized that this was the first time I had taken control of something in weeks. The banker didn't judge. He just listened, made copies of statements, and gave me the forms I needed. But leaving that office, walking through the bustling streets of Raleigh, feeling the cold wind on my face, I realized something I hadn't expected. I had a path forward, however complicated it might be. I wasn't helpless. I had evidence. I had options. And most importantly, I had the clarity to see the man I had been married to for what he truly was. I started confiding in a few close friends, carefully chosen, who I knew wouldn't judge me or tell him. Their reactions were the mixture of disbelief and anger I needed. They didn't sugarcoat anything. They told me I deserved better, that I had every right to be furious, and that I needed to think about myself. And even though part of me resented their advice, part of me clung to it like a lifeline. I realized I had been so focused on him, on his lies, on his betrayal, that I had forgotten about myself entirely. I had been living in his shadow, and now for the first time in weeks, I started to remember who I was. That recognition, small as it was, gave me a strange kind of power. I didn't need him to apologize. I didn't need him to grovel or try to make things right. I needed to reclaim my own life, my own sense of reality, my own identity. And I started to plan, quietly, carefully, deliberately. There was one night, though, that changed everything, that finally made the anger boil into something I couldn't ignore. I had gone out for a walk around our neighborhood, needing air, needing space, needing to escape the suffocating tension of our apartment. I ended up at the small convenience store 2 blocks away, buying water and trying to calm myself. And then I saw him, not at home, not pretending to be busy, not trying to act normal. I saw him at a corner coffee shop, sitting across from her, laughing, smiling, touching her hand. The casualness of it, the complete lack of guilt, made my knees weak. I felt like I might fall into the asphalt right there. I had followed him, almost subconsciously, and now I was witnessing the thing I had been dreading, the undeniable reality that he was living a life completely separate from mine, and I had been nothing more than a spectator to my own marriage being destroyed. That image, the two of them together, laughing, oblivious to the destruction they had caused, burned into my memory like fire. I couldn't unsee it. I couldn't unfeel it. And in that moment, I understood fully that the man I had loved was gone, replaced by someone I didn't know at all. I returned home that night, stomach twisting, mind racing. I confronted him again, harder this time, with every ounce of fury I had been holding back. I told him I had seen him. I told him I knew about the trips, the dates, the money,
His eyes widened slightly, and for the first time I saw fear. Not the casual, charming fear of getting caught, but real, visceral fear. And part of me felt a fleeting satisfaction, a brief sense of justice. But mostly I felt the crushing weight of sadness. This wasn't about punishment anymore. It was about reality.
He had chosen her, and I had to accept that, no matter how much it hurt, no matter how much I wanted things to be different. Acceptance didn't feel like relief. It felt like standing on a cliff, looking down into a void, knowing that once you jump, nothing will ever be the same. And I was standing there, trembling, looking at the life I thought I had, knowing it had been taken from me. The days that followed were a blur of paperwork, sleepless nights, and tense conversations. I started thinking about the future, about what it would mean to untangle our lives legally, emotionally, financially. I started making lists, taking notes, imagining a life where I didn't have to live with the constant reminder of his betrayal. And yet, in the quiet moments, I felt an aching emptiness, a longing for something that would never return. I realized that even if I walked away tomorrow, even if I reclaimed every dollar, every ounce of dignity, I would carry this wound with me. It would shape the way I trusted, the way I loved, the way I navigated relationships for years to come. And that realization, more than anything else, filled me with a mix of dread and determination. I would survive this. I would find a way forward. But it wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be simple. And it certainly wouldn't be over anytime soon. It was the little things that finally broke me, the tiny cracks in the armor of normalcy that he tried to wear like nothing had happened. One evening, he left his laptop open on the kitchen counter while he went to grab a drink. I hadn't planned on looking, I swear I hadn't, but the screen was unlocked, and my hand moved before my brain could stop it. There were messages, texts, emails, video calls saved in chat histories, all between him and her. Not casual flirting, not the kind you can excuse, but intimate, secretive, financial planning intimate. The numbers, the details, the reservations, the gifts, everything I had already known, but seeing it laid out there, raw and digital, made it impossible to pretend anymore. I collapsed onto the chair, hands over my face, the tears coming in waves I couldn't control. Baxter jumped onto my lap, whining, sensing the storm inside me, but even his comfort couldn't erase the reality of what I had discovered. Every fiber of my being felt betrayed, hollowed out, and at the same time strangely alive with the fire of anger I could no longer contain. I confronted him one last time that night. I slammed the laptop shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the apartment, and I stood over him in the dim light of the kitchen. He looked up, startled, panic flickering in his eyes, as if he had finally realized that the charade was over. I didn't ask him why, not anymore. I didn't need an explanation. I didn't need excuses. I wanted to see the truth in his eyes, and I wanted him to know that I had seen everything, every last detail, every lie, every secret. "It's over," I said, my voice steady despite the tears streaking down my cheeks. "I'm done pretending. I'm done believing you. I'm done trusting you." He opened his mouth, probably to beg, to explain, to make some last-ditch effort to salvage what he had destroyed. But I didn't let him speak. I turned away, pacing the small kitchen, shaking with rage and heartbreak, feeling like the ground had been ripped out from under me. The following days were a whirlwind of logistics and emotion. I filed for separation, contacted a lawyer, and started the painstaking process of untangling our finances. Every call, every form, every document was a reminder of what I had lost. Not just money, not just possessions, but the life I had believed I was living. I became hyper-aware of my own space, labeling accounts, changing passwords, creating a fortress around the pieces of my life he hadn't destroyed. I worked long hours, not because I had to, but because keeping busy was the only way to drown out the constant gnawing ache in my chest. And through it all, I noticed the small, almost imperceptible changes in myself. I was quieter, more guarded, more cautious. I scrutinized people in ways I never had before, scanning for hidden motives, secret lives, little betrayals that could mirror what I had endured. It was exhausting, but it was survival. It was necessary.
I began documenting everything: the receipts, the bank statements, the emails, the messages, the trips, the gifts. I printed them, filed them, created folders on my computer. I wasn't doing it for revenge. I wasn't doing it to prove something to him. I was doing it to prove something to myself, that I had seen clearly, that I had acted, that I had survived. Some nights I would sit in the guest room, staring at the stacks of papers, and I felt a quiet, bitter sense of pride. I had not let him break me completely. I had not become invisible in my own life. I had been betrayed, yes, but I had taken control of the wreckage he had left behind. I had survived the chaos he had caused, and that mattered more than anything else. There were moments, though, when the anger flared uncontrollably. I would see him across the apartment, hear his laugh, catch a glimpse of his face in the mirror, and my chest would tighten with fury. I wanted to scream, to throw things, to make him feel the tiniest fraction of the pain he had inflicted. But I couldn't. I was stronger than that now, or at least I tried to be. Instead, I focused on myself, on rebuilding the trust I had lost in the world, on reclaiming the parts of me that had been buried under years of loving someone who had never been fully present. I spent hours running, working out, taking long walks, reconnecting with friends I had neglected, even exploring hobbies I had abandoned. Each small act was a declaration of independence, a step toward reclaiming the self I had almost lost entirely. And then, finally, came the day I moved out. Packing up the apartment was surreal. Every item, every piece of furniture, every photograph carried memories of what had been, what I had believed in, and what had been taken from me. I carried boxes, one by one, feeling a strange mix of liberation and grief. When I walked out the door for the last time, keys in hand, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, but I also felt the deep, lingering ache of loss. I realized that even though I had survived, even though I had taken control of my life, some things were irreparable. Some betrayals leave marks you carry forever, and some people, no matter how much they claim to love you, are capable of actions that shatter the foundations of your life. I didn't know if I would ever fully recover from what he had done, but I knew I had to try. I owed that to myself. In the weeks that followed, I focused entirely on the future I could create alone. I found a small apartment closer to my work, furnished it with items I chose for myself, and began routines that didn't revolve around someone else's whims or secrets. I reconnected with friends, joined a local book club, and even started volunteering at an animal shelter. Every small act was a declaration that I was no longer defined by betrayal. The pain lingered, yes. The anger never fully disappeared, but in its place grew resilience, a quiet, hard-won understanding that I could endure, that I could rebuild, that I could exist fully and completely as myself, without the shadow of someone who had betrayed me looming over every decision.
I think the hardest part of it all was learning to trust again, not just others, but myself. After living in a marriage where everything had been manipulated, where love and money and loyalty had been exploited, I had to relearn my own judgment, my own instincts, my own ability to choose wisely. I started small, trusting friends, trusting my own intuition about people, trusting myself to make decisions without second-guessing every impulse, and slowly, incrementally, I began to feel human again. The betrayal would always be part of my story, always a chapter in the life I had lived, but it no longer defined me. I had survived it, and in surviving, I had found a kind of strength I didn't know I possessed. Even now, sometimes, memories hit me unexpectedly. Seeing him with her, the piles of receipts, the empty promises, but they no longer control me. They exist as a reminder of what I endured, what I overcame, and how fragile trust can be. I am cautious now, yes, wary, perhaps even a little hardened, but I am also free in a way I never was before. Free to make choices, free to love again on my own terms, free to live without fear that someone I trusted will quietly destroy everything I hold dear. And that freedom, messy and complicated and painful as it came, is the part I cling to. It is the part that reminds me every single day that I survived and that I am stronger for it, stronger than the betrayal, stronger than the lies, and finally, stronger than him.